All right, so this first 4 or 5 video is going to be super quick, just these first 2 problems. You guys have used the square root property before to solve equations. What you haven't done is started by factoring. So when you are told in your homework or on a mastery check to solve using the square root property, you leave the left-hand side exactly the way it is. So it's actually okay here that you've got a constant on the left and a constant on the right. We're going to take the left-hand side exactly the way it is, and we're going to factor it down. So there's a special pattern of factoring that when we go to factor this, remember we've talked about like how to multiply to get a certain number, how to add to get a certain number. So for these, we are trying to find 2 numbers whose product is 49 and whose sum is 14. And that's 7 and 7. And if we look down at this one, we're trying to find 2 numbers whose product is 4 and whose sum is -4, and that's -2 and -2. So notice with both of these, you get the exact same factor both times. So instead of writing x plus 7, which is what this would factor to, we can actually write it as x plus 7 squared, because it's 2 copies of x plus 7. So again, that's because the 7 multiplies together to get 49 and adds together to get 14. 7 times 7 is 49, 7 plus 7 is 14. So the left-hand side can just factor like that, and then we leave the 64 exactly the way it is. Okay, so that's how you set that up. Then the square root property tells us from here to try to get the x by itself, I can take the square root of both sides. So when I take the square root of the left, the squared and the square root cancel each other out, and I just have an x plus 7 left. And then on the right-hand side, do not forget your plus or minus. That is a vital part of the right-hand side because you're supposed to come up with 2 answers. So we have plus or minus, and then the square root of 64 is 8. So last step, we're trying to get our x by itself. Subtract the 7 from both sides. So this will cancel here, and then I'll have x equals -7 plus or minus 8. Don't leave your answer like this. If you can simplify it further, you should. So -7 plus 8 is 1, -7 minus 8 is -15. So those would be your 2 answers. And you can always plug those back in and check, and I encourage you to do so. So let me just remind you really quickly how to do that. So what you do is you can take the 1, for example, and you hit this control button and then the button above the 9. Whoops, there's a glare. Store that in as x, and then you can just type in the left-hand side. So you can type in x squared plus 14x plus 49 equals 64 and do a true-false check. Hit enter, and it gets true. You should be able to do the same thing with the -15, and you would also get true. Okay, let's do this one. So same factoring pattern that we had up here. When we're trying to factor down, we want to know what multiplies to 4 and adds to -4, and that would be -2 and -2. So instead of writing x minus 2, since it's the exact same factor, I'm just going to write x minus 2 squared, and then you just leave the 13 on the right. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit different, because when I go to take the square root, just like I did above, here the 64 came out nice and neat, here the 13 does not. Same thing on the left though, the square root and the square cancel, so I can just write x minus 2. And then here, don't forget your plus or minus. 13 doesn't simplify at all. If you can simplify the square root a little bit, do that. But here, all we can do is write it as the square root of 13. Okay, so add the 2 to both sides. It'll cancel over here. And you actually just leave this as positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 13. And that's how you'd write your answers. It's always better to have these rather than having a decimal. In the future, it'll make more sense to have a decimal, but here this is just fine.